Have you ever built something so perfect it breathed on its own? I spent 4 years bleeding code to create an unbreakable security core. Then a suit stole it, thinking he could fire me without consequences. He forgot one basic rule. You never corner the engineer who holds the only key to the monster's cage. Grab a bourbon. Let me tell you how an arrogant tech executive burned his empire to the ground on live television. Hello to all the amazing listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. Recently, YouTube disabled the monetization feature on our channel, leaving us with absolutely no operating budget. If you find today's story entertaining and valuable, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff for their living expenses and continue creating the stories you love. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comment section of this video. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Now, let me introduce you to the architect of this disaster, and the person who made sure it burned bright. My name is Lillian Watson. I am 32 years old, and I used to be the lead systems engineer at AeroVault Dynamics. AeroVault was a heavily funded startup based out of Austin, Texas. We were not building flashy apps for teenagers or social media platforms. We were engineering secure routing systems for commercial unmanned aerial vehicles. These were massive, heavy-duty drones designed to transport high-value, highly sensitive payloads across long distances. We are talking about human organs for emergency transplants, classified government hard drives, and millions of dollars in industrial prototype parts. Stuff that sophisticated criminals actively try to intercept. The beating heart of our operation was Project Aegis. I did not just supervise its creation, I bled over my mechanical keyboard, writing every critical line of that multi-layered quantum encryption core myself. For 4 solid years, I survived on nothing but black coffee, stale takeout, and 4 hours of sleep a night. Aegis was my masterpiece. It ensured that our drones were completely immune to signal jamming, spoofing, or hostile takeovers. If a bad actor even tried to probe the connection, Aegis would dynamically reroute the flight path and scramble the encryption keys instantaneously. It was an absolute digital fortress. Then the board of directors decided we needed a corporate face to attract bigger investors, so they hired Marcus Thorne as our new chief technology officer. Marcus was a walking, talking disaster wrapped in an expensive, custom-tailored suit. He migrated over from the sterile world of financial management consulting. He loved the smell of his own cologne and spoke almost entirely in meaningless corporate jargon. He would strut through the engineering department, clapping developers on the shoulder, demanding we focus on creating an explosive ecosystem and adopting a decentralized mindset. The man could not differentiate between a physical hardware server and cloud storage. Once, he pointed to an industrial air conditioning unit in the server room and asked if it was running our latest database backup. The fundamental disconnect was that Marcus viewed engineering as a simple assembly line. To him, my team was just a group of factory workers who were not typing fast enough. He cared about one thing and one thing only: launching Project Aegis at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. CES is the biggest stage in the world for tech reveals, and the exhibition was only a handful of months away. He wanted the flashing lights, the breathless media coverage, and the massive wave of venture capital funding that would secure his multi-million-dollar bonus. To hit his impossible deadline, Marcus ordered me to bypass our mandatory hardware safety and penetration testing protocols. He wanted to strip down the security layers just to make the software load faster for his stage demonstration. I refused, categorically and aggressively. Lowering those standards meant someone could theoretically hijack a physical drone mid-flight, turning a heavy piece of machinery into a literal missile. We clashed violently in the main glass-walled boardroom. "We are not shipping half-baked code that governs physical vehicles," I stated, glaring at his perfectly manicured hands. "If Aegis fails, a secure payload gets hijacked, or worse, someone gets killed when a drone drops out of the sky." Marcus let out a theatrical sigh, leaning back in his leather chair. "Lillian, you are missing the commercial reality. We are pushing boundaries here. Sometimes you have to break things to move fast and disrupt the market. Right now, your obsession with perfection is becoming an obstacle to innovation. It is not an obstacle to innovation, I snapped back. It is the only thing keeping your product from becoming a federal liability. He just smiled a cold, condescending smile. That was the moment I realized my company was gone. He did not care about the product. He only cared about the presentation. Because he could not fire me outright without stalling the project. Marcus chose the coward's route. 2 weeks later, I noticed anomalous read-only access requests hitting our internal repository. I traced the network logs. Marcus had secretly contracted a cheap, outsourced engineering firm. He had given a bunch of unknown freelancers access to our codebase. His goal was painfully obvious. He wanted them to reverse engineer my architecture, break the encryption formatting, and clone the code so he could cut me out of the picture before the Las Vegas launch. He thought he could quietly steal the keys to the kingdom while I was busy. He did not realize he had just started a silent war, and he was completely unarmed. The betrayal did not arrive with a dramatic announcement. It crept in like a slow-acting poison, manifesting in tiny, calculated microaggressions across the network. It started on a random Tuesday morning. I tried to pull up the quarterly strategic roadmap to align the upcoming security patch deployment, only to be greeted by a gray screen declaring my access denied. At first, I assumed it was a standard server migration glitch, perhaps a simple error in the permissions matrix, but then, the internal company newsletters and quarterly presentation slide decks were circulated. My name, which had been proudly stamped on the title slide of the Aegis architecture schematic since day one, was entirely scrubbed, replaced by a bland, generic tag reading AeroVault Engineering Team. I was being walled off inside the digital fortress I had constructed. Then came the sudden shifts in personnel. Kevin, a junior developer I had practically spoon-fed through his first 2 major debugging cycles, suddenly updated his internal profile. He was now the Director of Integration. It was a fabricated title that did not exist 24 hours prior, clearly handed out as a reward for blind loyalty to the new regime. I bumped into him by the espresso machine the very next afternoon. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the dripping coffee, his shoulders tense, his posture unnaturally rigid. "Congratulations on the sudden bump, Kevin," I said evenly, keeping my tone perfectly flat. He swallowed hard, muttered a barely audible word of thanks, grabbed his mug, and practically sprinted out of the break room without ever meeting my gaze. He knew exactly whose blood was paying for his new salary bracket, and the guilt was written all over his face. The ultimate insult arrived at the end of the month. Marcus hosted an exclusive closed-door mixer for our venture capitalists in the main lobby. I stood on the second-floor mezzanine, hidden in the shadows, listening to his booming, amplified voice echo off the glass walls. He stood in front of a sleek banner displaying the Aegis logo, gripping a microphone like a rock star. "When I architected the core vision for this system," he announced smoothly, pausing to let the investors absorb the lie, "I knew we had to transcend traditional logistics and build an unbreakable paradigm." I pressed my fingernails into my palms until they left crescent-shaped marks. He was rewriting history in real time. He was selling them a phantom, wrapping himself in the credit of my life's work to secure another $50 million in funding. But the vanity and the stolen credit I could stomach, the lethal negligence, however, I could not. Out of sheer paranoia, I ran a deep diagnostic on the parallel staging environment his outsourced team had been quietly modifying. What I found made the blood freeze in my veins. To make the user interface load exactly 3 seconds faster for his precious Las Vegas demonstration, his shadow contractors had taken a machete to my code. They had deliberately cut out the physical hardware safety check protocol. In practical terms, the software no longer verified if the drone's mechanical rotors, GPS sensors, and battery arrays were actually secure before initializing the flight sequence. It just blindly assumed everything was fine and forced a launch command. If they pushed this reckless bypass to the live production server, a single corrupted data packet or a minor voltage drop, could send a heavy industrial machine crashing down into a populated neighborhood. It was a catastrophic vulnerability. It was not just corporate recklessness, it was bordering on criminal liability. 6 months ago, I would have stormed right into his corner office, slammed a printout of the logs onto his desk, and threatened to report the company to the federal regulators. But standing there, bathed in the cold blue light of my triple monitors, a strange, absolute silence washed over me. The burning anger simply evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. I realized with crystalline certainty that AeroVault was dead. The startup I had built had been hijacked by a charismatic parasite. So, I stopped fighting. I stopped sending warning emails that no one read. Instead, I opened a hidden, encrypted terminal buried deep within the legacy servers. I began logging absolutely everything, every unauthorized access request, every overwritten security protocol, every direct command Marcus issued to his outsourced team. I documented the exact hour and minute they ripped out the safety checks. I packaged the raw server logs, the code commit histories, and the executive memos into highly compressed, secure digital vaults. I was no longer a lead engineer trying to save a compromised project. I was an archivist compiling a flawless dossier for an execution. They wanted to steal my system. I was going back into the shadows to let them. But I was going to make sure that when the entire house of cards collapsed, his fingerprints would be illuminated on every single falling piece. The purge was coming. The confirmation of my impending demise arrived via an encrypted, self-deleting message at 2 a.m. It was from Sarah, a contact I had cultivated in the Human Resources Department. The text was brief and clinical. Termination paperwork drafted. Marcus pushing for immediate exit by Friday. Reason cited is poor cultural fit and resistance to corporate synergy. I read the words twice, letting the soft glow of my smartphone illuminate the dark bedroom. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the urge to scream or hurl my phone against the wall. A sniper does not panic when the wind changes. They simply adjust their scope. Marcus was making his final move to secure the kingdom, aiming to sever my head before his grand debut. He expected me to either grovel for a severance package or throw a spectacular, irrational tantrum that would only validate his narrative of my instability. I would give him neither. I drove to the office while the city of Austin was still asleep. The building was completely deserted, save for the solitary security guard dozing at the front desk. I badged in, walked to my terminal, and cracked my knuckles. I had exactly 72 hours before HR would call me into a glass room to slaughter my career. I was not going to salt the earth. A lesser engineer might have deployed a logic bomb to wipe the databases, or introduced a malicious ransomware worm to burn the servers to the ground. That is vandalism. I am an architect. I respect the integrity of the machine too much to destroy it. Instead, I decided to let the system defend its own honor. I opened a hidden root directory and began writing a deeply embedded subroutine. I titled the project Judgment Mode. The brilliance of Judgment Mode lay in its absolute silence. I completely rewired the core initialization sequence for the final production environment. Up until this point, booting the Aegis software required a complex, but ultimately, digital, alphanumeric password. Digital keys can be guessed, copied, or bypassed if you throw enough processing power at them. I changed the locks. I tethered the absolute foundation of the operating system to a physical biometric hardware token. It was a heavy encrypted drive made of brushed tungsten that required my specific thumbprint to complete a cryptographic handshake with the server. If the software did not sense the physical presence of that exact piece of metal in my living pulse, it would not yield the master decryption keys. But simply locking them out was not enough. If the system crashed immediately upon startup, Marcus would just cancel his demonstration, blame a technical glitch, and buy himself another month to have his shadow team rewrite the framework. I needed him fully exposed, standing in the crosshairs with nowhere to hide. So, I programmed a lethal delay. If the outsourced engineers forced the system to boot without my biometric hardware token, Judgment Mode would not fight back. It would warmly welcome them. It would generate a ghost sequence, simulating a perfectly healthy launch environment. It would feed the user interface beautiful, flawless telemetry data for exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a lifetime on a stage. It is just enough time for an arrogant executive to puff out his chest, for the venture capitalists to start calculating their returns, and for the media to start snapping photographs. And then, at the 300th second, the trap would snap shut. The ghost sequence would evaporate. The system would instantly lock down every single byte of data, freeze the drone engines, and violently purge the hidden cache. More importantly, it would automatically trigger a localized broadcast, projecting a raw, unedited audit log of every single security bypass Marcus had ordered directly onto the main display. It would not just fail, it would testify against him. By 4 in the morning, the code was compiled and injected into the master update branch. I held the tungsten hardware token in the palm of my hand. It was cold, heavy, and held the only pulse that could keep the system alive. I left the office and drove west, winding through the empty streets until I reached the Pennybacker Bridge. The massive steel arch loomed over the black, silent expanse of the Colorado River. I parked on the gravel shoulder and walked out to the center span. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I looked down at the dark water, rushing blindly toward the Gulf. I held the token over the edge. This was the point of no return. If I kept it, I could always undo what I had done. I could save him. I could save the company. I opened my hand. The small piece of metal disappeared into the void. A few seconds later, a tiny, invisible splash confirmed the severing of the cord. The only key to the monster's cage now rested in the suffocating mud at the bottom of the river. I drove back to my desk to perform the final cleanup. I systematically wiped every trace of my late-night network access. I scrubbed the keyboard logs and purged the security camera timestamps. Finally, I applied the ultimate camouflage. I renamed the Judgment Mode executable file, burying it under a mountain of irrelevant code. I labeled it as an obsolete audio driver error from 3 years prior. In the fast-paced, chaotic world of startup engineering, nobody ever inspects a legacy error file. It was a ghost in the machine, perfectly dormant, waiting patiently for a fool to wake it up. The execution took place the very next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I received a calendar invite titled simply, Sync with Leadership in the Corporate World. A sudden sync with leadership and the Director of Human Resources in a soundproof glass conference room means only one thing. You are about to be walked off the premises. I stepped into the room. Marcus was already seated at the head of the long oak table, wearing a navy blue tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. Next to him sat Brenda, the head of HR, sporting an expression of rehearsed corporate sympathy. A thick stack of documents lay perfectly centered on the table between them. "Lillian, please, take a seat," Marcus said. His voice dripped with an artificial softness, the kind of tone you might use to speak to a frightened animal. He steepled his manicured fingers together, leaning forward to project an aura of heavy responsibility. This is not an easy conversation for any of us to have. I sat down, keeping my posture relaxed and my hands resting gently on my lap. I did not say a word. I just looked at him, waiting for the performance to unfold. Brenda cleared her throat and slid the stack of papers across the polished wood. "Lillian, effective immediately. Aero Vault Dynamics is terminating your employment. We have put together a comprehensive severance package for you, which includes 6 weeks of base salary and the continuation of your health benefits until the end of the current month. 6 weeks, after 4 years of giving them my blood, my sweat, and my absolute sanity. They were buying my silence with a month and a half of pay. It was a hilariously insulting number, but I just nodded slowly. Brenda tapped a manicured fingernail against a specific paragraph on the second page. "We also require you to sign this standard non-disparagement agreement. It simply states that you will not speak negatively about the company, its leadership, or its proprietary technology to any media outlets, investors, or competitors." I almost laughed out loud. They were terrified I would run to the tech blogs and warn the public. They did not realize I wanted the investors to see the failure with their own eyes. Marcus picked up the narrative, clearly eager to deliver the killing blow. We want to thank you for laying the groundwork. Lillian, truly. But as we pivot towards the Las Vegas exhibition, the board feels we need a more aggressive commercialization vision. We can no longer be held back by technical conservatism. We need a team that understands the velocity of the modern market. Technical conservatism. That was his brilliant euphemism for wanting a system that did not crash multi-ton drones into civilian infrastructure. He leaned back, his lips curling into a smug, triumphant smile. And just as a standard administrative reminder, per Section 4 of your original employment contract, all intellectual property, including every single line of the source code you authored, remains the exclusive and permanent property of AeroVault Dynamics. The legal team has been very thorough. I am sure you understand that you have no remaining rights to the architecture. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for me to turn red, to pound my fists on the table, to scream about how his shadow team was mangling my life's work, or to threaten him with a lawsuit. He wanted the satisfaction of watching me break so he could feel justified in his ruthlessness. He wanted to feel like the conqueror banishing the defeated peasant. Instead, I looked down at the severance agreement. I picked up the heavy metal pen provided by HR. I did not read a single line of the 45 pages of legal jargon. I simply flipped to the final page and signed my name with a fluid, elegant stroke. Then, I looked up and gave Marcus the brightest, most genuine smile I had ever directed at him. It was a smile born of absolute, terrifying serenity. "I understand perfectly, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth and cheerful. "The code is entirely yours now. You own every single piece of it. I truly wish you the best of luck with the launch. You are going to get exactly the showcase you deserve." For a fleeting second, the smugness vanished from his face. My total lack of resistance threw him entirely off balance. I saw a micro-expression of sheer panic flash behind his eyes, a sudden, primal realization that a cornered predator should not be smiling. He opened his mouth to say something, to probe for the catch, but his colossal ego quickly stamped out that momentary shiver of intuition. He convinced himself that I was just a broken, defeated engineer trying to save face. "Well," Marcus stammered slightly, adjusting his silk tie, "we appreciate your professionalism. Lillian." I stood up, pushed my chair in neatly, and walked out of the glass room without looking back. A designated security guard escorted me to my desk to pack my things. Half an hour later, I stepped out of the front doors of the AeroVault building into the blinding Texas sunlight. I was carrying a lightweight cardboard box containing a mechanical keyboard, a ceramic coffee mug, and a small potted succulent. That was it. My shoulders felt impossibly light. The air tasted incredibly sweet. I was completely free, holding a front-row ticket to the greatest theatrical disaster in the history of Silicon Valley, and I could not wait for the curtain to rise. Over the next 3 weeks, AeroVault Dynamics ignited a marketing bonfire, burning through millions of dollars with reckless abandon. Marcus was absolutely everywhere. His perfectly styled face and artificially whitened teeth were plastered across the digital covers of the most prestigious tech magazines on the planet. Breathless editorials crowned him the new Steve Jobs of security logistics. The promotional videos showed him walking in slow motion through a hangar of drones, spouting hollow philosophies about the future of secure commercial transport. The public relations machine was operating at maximum velocity, generating a massive wave of global anticipation. But behind that glossy, highly expensive facade, the engineering department was drowning in a spectacular meltdown. From the quiet, sunlit sanctuary of my apartment living room, I watched the internal disaster unfold in real time. I still maintained passive, read-only access to an encrypted, anonymous developer forum that the legacy engineering team used as a digital break room to complain about management. Reading their panicked chat logs over my morning coffee became my favorite daily ritual. It was a beautiful, satisfying symphony of pure, unadulterated terror. Kevin, the newly minted director of integration who had avoided my gaze by the espresso machine, was clearly collapsing under the weight of his unearned title. The anonymous forum threads were flooded with frantic, increasingly desperate messages. They were encountering massive, cascading compilation failures every single time they tried to package the final software build for the exhibition stage. The system kept throwing completely abstract dependency errors, blocking their progress at every turn, because they did not possess even a fraction of the architectural knowledge required to trace the roots of judgment mode. They were blindly chasing ghosts in the machine. They were trying to fix a puzzle when they did not even realize the pieces had been glued to the table. As the clock ticked down, the panic turned into sheer lunacy. In a desperate bid to bypass the final authentication protocols they could not comprehend, Marcus authorized his outsourced shadow team to deploy advanced artificial intelligence models. I watched the server logs as they attempted to artificially generate my specific biometric telemetry and brute force the login credentials. It was a pathetic, chaotic attempt to forge a digital phantom. They threw thousands of simulated login requests against the firewall, hoping the machine learning algorithm could trick the core into unlocking. Naturally, the system rejected every single attempt with cold mathematical precision. An artificial intelligence algorithm, no matter how advanced, cannot replicate the heavy physical presence of a brushed tungsten hardware token that was currently resting securely under 10 feet of thick, suffocating mud at the bottom of the Colorado River. The lock was absolute, and the key was permanently erased from the physical world. With the Las Vegas exhibition looming just 72 hours away, the crushing pressure finally shattered whatever tiny fragment remained of Marcus and his common sense. Through a leaked internal executive memo pasted onto the hidden developer forum, I read his final, fatal decree to the engineering department. He had reached the point of no return. "Ignore all warnings," Marcus commanded in the message, his arrogance bleeding through the text. "Use a temporary patch to force the system to run for the launch. We will fix it later." I leaned back in my chair and smiled until my cheeks ached. He had done it, to save his pride and secure the upcoming round of venture capital funding. He had officially instructed his team to bypass all remaining fail-safes and forcibly awaken the dormant core. By ordering his developers to shove a temporary software wedge into a biometric lock they did not understand, he had just pulled the pin out of a live grenade and tightly gripped it in his own hand, completely unaware that the fuse was already burning rapidly toward the explosive payload. It was finally time to get ready for the show. I opened my laptop and navigated to the official Consumer Electronics Show ticketing portal. I purchased a Prime, front-row VIP pass for the main stage keynote presentation. I packed a sleek leather suitcase, intentionally leaving behind my usual engineering uniform of faded denim jeans and oversized, gray cotton hoodies. Instead, I carefully packed a tailored, striking crimson-red dress and a pair of incredibly sharp, elegant stiletto heels. If you are going to attend a very public funeral for a corporate empire, you should absolutely dress for the occasion. I boarded a first-class flight to Nevada, settled into a luxury penthouse suite at the Bellagio, poured myself a glass of aged bourbon, and waited with intense anticipation for the curtain to rise. The cavernous auditorium at the Consumer Electronics Show was suffocatingly packed. Thousands of venture capitalists, industry analysts, and television camera crews were crammed shoulder to shoulder, their lenses pointed squarely at the main stage. Marcus strode out from the wings with the absolute arrogance of a conquering king returning from war. He was ready to demonstrate the live control of a synchronized fleet of massive drones, simulating the transport of highly classified data straight across a digital map of the city. He held a sleek, transparent tablet in one hand and flashed his artificially brightened smile to the crowd. With a theatrical flourish, he pressed the activation button. The colossal LED screen behind him roared to life. For exactly 4 minutes, the ghost sequence I had built performed a flawless symphony. The user interface was stunningly beautiful. The simulated drones navigated the digital airspace perfectly, dodging simulated weather patterns and routing securely. The audience erupted into a thunderous round of applause. Marcus was beaming, soaking in the worship, completely oblivious to the countdown running in the dark. Then the internal clock hit minute 5. The system reached deep into the core to verify the biometric handshake. It grasped at empty air. Judgment mode awoke. Instantly, the beautiful, slick interface vanished. The towering LED screen behind Marcus violently shifted to a blinding, blood-red hue. On the display, every single drone simultaneously halted, reversed their flight paths, returned to their origin points, and permanently locked their engine clusters. The crowd fell dead silent. Marcus frowned, his perfectly manicured fingers frantically tapping the glass of his tablet. Then, the real show began. Cascading down the massive red screen were tens of thousands of lines of raw system logs in a giant, glaring white font. It was my meticulously curated dossier. The screen publicly broadcasted every single encrypted email Marcus had sent ordering his shadow team to bypass the safety protocols. It displayed the exact timestamps where he commanded them to cut corners and butcher my architecture. He was completely exposed, stripped of his lies, right before the entire industry. The scrolling stopped abruptly, and a final, massive block of text flashed rhythmically on the screen. Error: unauthorized access detected. Stolen architecture. System temporarily self-destructing to protect data. The silence shattered into absolute chaos. Furious investors leaped to their feet, shouting in outrage and betrayal. A tidal wave of technology reporters rushed the edge of the stage, their camera flashes firing like strobe lights as they desperately photographed the damning evidence projected behind him. Marcus stood frozen, paralyzed by the sudden, brutal evaporation of his entire universe. All the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. His fingers went completely numb. The expensive transparent tablet slipped from his grasp and shattered into a dozen pieces on the hard wooden floor. In his blind panic, his eyes darted wildly toward the VIP section, scanning the front row. And there I was. I was standing perfectly still in my crimson-red dress amidst the screaming crowd. When our eyes finally met, the sheer, unadulterated terror in his gaze was the most intoxicating thing I had ever witnessed. I slowly raised my crystal glass of champagne, gave him a deliberate, slow wink, and took a sip. Then, I turned my back to the stage and walked calmly up the aisle, leaving him to drown in the burning wreckage of the empire he thought he had stolen. Within 48 hours, AeroVault Dynamics was subjected to massive federal fraud investigations initiated by furious investors. Marcus was personally named in multiple high-profile civil lawsuits that would guarantee he never worked in the technology sector again. As for me, I spent the following afternoon sitting on the sun-drenched balcony of my Bellagio penthouse suite. My secure phone rang. It was an encrypted line from a senior director at the Department of Defense. They had seen the spectacular implosion at the exhibition. They did not care about the corporate drama. They only cared that I had built an impenetrable system and rigged it to trap a thief flawlessly. They offered me an independent security consulting contract with a completely blank check. I accepted the offer immediately, because in the end, public relations campaigns and tailored suits will always burn to ash, but the truth, and a perfectly compiled source code, will never lie. Thank you so very much to everyone for spending your valuable time listening to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, YouTube has unfortunately disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to operate. If you enjoyed this journey today and want to help us out, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your incredible kindness allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they have the money to feed their families and continue bringing you the most entertaining stories on the internet. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again. Stay strong, and we will see you in the next video.